Merry Meet. In this lecture, I will be discussing the idea of protection magic. Now, the first thing we need to understand is what the term protection magic actually means. For many people, the first thing that's going to come to mind when you hear protection magic is something along the lines of what we see in the Harry Potter movies and the defense against the dark arts. And it really is nothing like that. We aren't fighting demons. We aren't battling other witches. We're not dueling. We're not deflecting magical spells and whatnot. Protection magic is simply about keeping ourselves from negative energy, keeping our energy safe, the magic that we're working with, keeping negative energy out. It's as simple as that. Now, protection magic is usually one of two things. Active protection magic, also known as preventative magic, and then there is reversal magic. Now let's start with preventative magic. The way I like to look at this is along the lines of health. If we look at preventative magic like we do preventative medicine, preventative health care, this is akin to washing our hands and taking our vitamins and making sure we're preventing germs and nasty stuff to get us sick. So this is, in magic sense, preventing negative energy from attaching itself to us. Preventative magic could be done on a daily basis, and actually it kind of should be done on a daily basis, especially if you're coming in contact with other human beings on a daily basis. Just like we should wash our hands every time we go to the bathroom and clean off the cart before we push it and make sure that we're not, going into areas where there are going to be sick people. If we're going to be doing that, we know that we need to make sure that we double our efforts. So the same can be said if we are going to be dealing with a lot of people with negative energy, if we're going into situations where we are going to be coming in contact with other people's energy, or if we're doing a lot of work that requires specific energy and we don't need that specific energy all the time. So we need to kind of look at preventative magic the same way we do as preventative medicine, and make sure that we're taking care of ourselves, eating healthy, taking our vitamins, boosting our vitamin C during cold and flu season, and so on. We do the same things when we're working with preventative magic. Now I'm going to be covering a few ideas that can be used for preventative magic. The first one is simply grounding and centering. When we learn how to ground and center ourselves, what we're doing is we are pushing that energy that we've created out and regrouping in a way. It can be done in many, many different ways. Very commonly is to imagine simply that energy pushing down through your body from the top all the way down into the ground and turning into roots and just returning to the earth. A lot of people like to simply go outside if you can and take off your shoes and physically feel your feet on the ground. Other ways of grounding are simply eating a heavy meal and bringing back in those nutrients that we've kind of relinquished when we're working our magic. So there are many different forms of grounding and centering, and it's simply just eliminating the excess energy, because when we are, say, working a spell where we're gathering in a specific energy that is for, say, prosperity, we don't need that 24/7, especially if we're working other magical workings, such as we wouldn't want the prosperity if we're doing another form of magic that doesn't require that. So we want to make sure that we're just kind of eliminating the excess, because when we have energy that we're working with and we're constantly pulling in, it's a very big drain and can sort of uh, drain you physically and make you very lethargic and can cause you to become physically sick and whatnot as well. So grounding and centering is a very nice key element to preventative magic, because when we are simply just getting rid of that excess energy that we don't need, a lot of times if we don't ground and center, we have extra energy, and that can kind of cause wear and tear. You start feeling like you've had way too much caffeine, get jittery and shaky, and feel like you have to be moving and have to be doing something. Um, and it's very distracting, especially if you've just worked magic and you're trying to go to sleep, you haven't grounded and centered. More than likely, you're going to find yourself suffering from insomnia. So, grounding and centering is something that should be used regularly. The next idea would be smudging. This is where we take a bundle of sage, traditionally, simply sage. You can also get bundles with other herbs included, such as lavender or dragon's blood or copal or cedar. There are hundreds of different combinations that you can get these days. You light a sage stick, you start from the top, work your way down, and this neutralizes the energies that are surrounding you. This is great for if you've had an extra stressful day and you've dealt with a lot of negative energy. If you've come in contact with some very negative people and whatnot, sage smudging helps neutralize those energies. And then you can, with the other herbs and whatnot that are added to it, you can pull in specific energies as well. Dragon's blood is good for protection. Copal is good for eliminating negative energy, and really dealing with it, like exercising it out. Then there is lavender, which is good for helping relax and bring in more of a calming energy to you. So what you use is totally up to you. Now, sage smudging, a lot of people think you have to go purchase a big bundle of sage or put together a big bundle of sage, and that's not the only way to do that. Um, Go to your local supermarket and you can get a little canister of rubbed sage for fairly inexpensive. You can burn that on a charcoal disc like you would with incense. If you don't have an incense burner, you can also use a clean ashtray, or you can get the bottom of those terracotta planters can be used. Those things are great. Um, but just simply burning sage, it doesn't have to be a huge sage stick. It can be simply ground sage that you get at the grocery for relatively cheap. So for those people who want to try sage smudging but can't find the big sage bundles, you don't have to worry about that. So that's another great way, and it's kind of like along the lines of simply washing your hands after you've been someplace where people have been sick, or you don't know healthy the people are that you've come in contact. Like you go to the grocery store, you've put your hands on the cart. You don't know who had that cart last. They could have sneezed all over it. So to prevent yourself from catching that cold during cold and flu season, you would wash your hands. Sage smudging along the same lines of washing your hands. Something that can be done on a regular basis, and it's a good habit to get into. One of my absolute favorite things is apple cider vinegar. I often, when students come to me and tell me that they're dealing with a negative person or dealing with negative energy, negative people, my first go-to thing is tell them to take an apple cider vinegar bath. These are this is my favorite thing in the world to do because it's so simple and it works so well. You go to the store and you can buy a small bottle of apple cider vinegar for less than $1. All you do, you fill up your tub, you can throw in a handful of salt and a handful of baking soda in there too to keep your skin from drying out. But you just pour in the bottle of apple cider vinegar into your tub and relax. And what this does is the acidity in the vinegar does two different things. The first thing it does is it helps recharge your energies. Think of yourself as a battery. The vinegar and the acidity helps recharge your batteries. It cleanses your aura. It realigns all of that energy that you've been dealing with. And then on top of that, it eats away the negative energy that has attached itself to you. A lot of times we come in contact with negative people who don't necessarily realize that they're negative. You'll know these people because when you come in contact with them, you completely and totally feel drained of energy. These are what are commonly known as quote unquote psychic vampires. What they do is they just kind of leech your energy from you, and they tend to become more energetic the more they're around you, and you start feeling more lethargic. And you know that you've come in contact with one of these people when after they leave, you just feel like curling up and going to sleep because you are so drained. And a lot of times these people don't realize that they're doing it. 9 times out of 10, a psychic vampire doesn't realize that they are. A lot of times they have the best intentions. They, don't realize that they're doing it. So we can't really find them at fault. But when we come in contact with them, now we know what we can do to combat that. And that's to do this apple cider vinegar bath. And not only does it remove any energy leeches, as I like to look at them as, because they leech that energy from you, it releases that connection, and it makes it more difficult for them to connect back with you. So especially if this is like a coworker or someone that you see on a day-to-day basis. You don't want to have to take a vinegar bath every single day, but every couple of weeks or whatnot. And the more often you do it, the more difficult it will be for them to connect to your energy as you go, because you'll start building up a tolerance. If you don't like baths, I know a lot of people do not care for taking a bath and sitting in a bathtub. Another option is to do it in a shower and simply take the little bottle and slowly pour it over the top of your head and let it go down your body. Now, when you do that, first know it will be very cold. So it's very chilly when you do that, because it's not warmed. If you want to try to warm it first, keep the lid on it and set it in a bowl of warm water, and that'll help warm it. But also keep your eyes and mouth pursed shut, because it will, if it gets in your eyes, it will sting. And it tastes decent if you like vinegar. Um, but it will make your mouth get real kind of pursed because it's, well, vinegar. Um, and your hair will feel amazing afterwards because on top of the spiritual benefits of apple cider vinegar, it releases all of any buildup of whatever hair product and whatever hair soap you use. There's usually a waxy buildup that is caused by most commercial soaps. So it will cause your hair to become extremely soft. So apple cider vinegar baths are great to use if whenever you've come in contact with these people who just kind of drain you. And like I said, it recharges that aura, it recharges your energies as well, and replenishes what they've taken. I wouldn't do it on a daily basis, but a weekly or monthly basis would be good. Uh, Otherwise, your skin will start to dry out. Another popular thing to do is something very simple, and it's just shielding yourself with white light. This is helpful when you know you're going to be going into a situation, or if you're very, very sensitive and very empathic to other people's energies. Uh, I usually have to do this before I go to the grocery store. Otherwise, I feel bombarded and start getting very anxious and nervous because I have all of these other people who are in a hurry and aggravated and have had bad days, and all their energy seems to be coming at me. So, what I do is simply focus my energy before I leave and simply envision a boundary around me of white light. Um, it's kind of like creating a little force field around you, and you just have to focus that. And it takes a while for you to, make sure that it's thick enough. It's kind of a trial and error thing. So keep trying it until you find the way that is best and easiest for you and what works for you, because everybody's sensitivities are different. I like to try to focus starting from the top of my head, going down around me, and just envisioning a bubble surrounding me. And it's kind of like your circle of protection. It works as a filter. It's not going to make people bounce off of the energy field around you. That would be amazing. And I would use that to my advantage if that was the case. That would be a lot of fun playing bumper cars. But it will help block and filter any energy that other people may have that you happen to come in contact with, so that life is a little bit easier for you. Another nice method, which kind of works with the idea of the shielding, are simply talismans and gemstones that you can carry with you on your person. Uh, these things are very handy to have. In the image that I have up here, this is a necklace that I wear anytime I'm going into a situation of unknowns, or a situation that I may feel that I need that extra security, or if I'm, just even just going anywhere where there's any energy that, may not necessarily be positive. It might not be negative, but it may be tense or stresses or whatnot. It's a moonstone there in the center. knowing what your correspondences are is very important. And so understanding what gemstones and their correspondences are is very important and helpful. For instance, here is the moonstone, and that helps with calming energy. Other ones that a lot of people like to use are clear quartz or rose quartz. Some people enjoy using amethyst, smoky quartz, hematite, obsidian, and jet also help with dealing with emotional and stressful events. So, understanding what gemstones and their purposes are and those correspondences are will be very helpful in finding talismans or jewelry that you can wear to help kind of shield you and help you with creating that shield that you might need. Sometimes just holding the gemstone in your hand. I always carry I have moonstones all over the place. I keep them in my pockets. I have them in my purse. I wear them as jewelry simply because they help with extra sensitivity and dealing with other emotional crises and whatnot. So I keep them where I can easily access them, and if I need to, I'll hold on to it and just focus my energy and realign myself. So understanding what works for you is is huge. Know your correspondences. Like I always say, magic is the understanding of what different things have on a person. So understanding what symbols give you peace, what stones give you peace, what stones help you feel more comfortable is a big part of preventative magic. So when you understand what works, then you're going to be able to find items that you can keep with you that will help center you and help you feel protected. So the things I have just listed, the grounding and centering, sage smudging, apple cider vinegar, shielding with white light, talismans and gemstones, all of those things can be used on a daily basis and work like a safety net or like a surgical mask would when you're trying to keep out things from making you sick. This can help your energy from being overloaded and keep you from being bothered by other people's energies. So those were preventative magic. Now, if there are times when you do feel that someone has sent negative energy to you and is harming you in some way, there are things that can be done to actively reverse what has been done to you. Now, the first thing you need to do is figure out who is that angry with you. Who would be sending out so much negative energy to you, and why would they be doing this? In order for someone to actually curse another person, there has to be a lot of negative energy being focused onto that person. Otherwise, negative energy isn't going to last very long. If you're just mad at someone and you send that out, usually by the time that it's sent, you're over it. And so and that negative energy, it might cause a minor annoyance to that person. You know, you focus that energy and they stub their toe, but it's not going to last and last and last. In order for an actual curse to last, there has to be a deep seated hatred for another person, and that takes a lot of energy. There has to be something to fuel that negativity in order for it to take hold. So someone would have to hate you with an extreme passion in order for something horrible to happen. Now, people do hold on to negativity and grudges, and this can be sent out to other people, but usually, like I said, they tend to be more of an annoyance to that person. It's not usually harm. It's not usually, you know, terrible things happening to that person. It's minor annoyances. It's, aggravations. It's negative things that can happen, but not to an enormous extreme. So when a lot of negative things start happening to you, my first thought would be to figure out what is going on. And maybe there is a way to work through it with the person who seems to have it out for you. A lot of times, misunderstandings can cause issues. And if these things are talked through, then sometimes that can help. That doesn't work. There are things that can be done to help you out. So in extreme cases, if you are being stalked, if you have somebody who just for some strange reason just has this focused hatred, because this does happen, people become obsessed with something in their head that makes them think, I hate this person for some strange reason, and it's only understandable to them. And there's no way of talking through it. There's no way of fixing it. You've just rubbed that person the wrong way. And so they're focusing that negative energy. Sometimes they will, if you ignore it long enough, and if it's just minor annoyances, and you show that, really isn't worth the trouble of dealing with you at this point in time, usually they go away and they leave you alone and they go and focus on something else. But sometimes there's that switch that's flipped and they can't let it go and they become obsessive and they become harmful. So you should always, before doing anything, make sure that you're following the chain of command. And that is, you need to make sure you understand who is causing the problem, why they are causing the problem. Is there a solution to this issue? Is there a way of resolving it? If not, you need to make sure that you document everything that's going on. You make sure that you keep clear records. You make sure that you have the physical proof. You make sure that you go to people in authority. If it's somebody that, is causing problems at work, you go to your boss, to the human resources people. If this is someone who is threatening physical harm to you and causing negative issues for you, threatening you and all that, you go to the police first. You make sure that you have written things out, that you have proof of what's going on, you have made record that this person is causing issue for you. If you need to get a restraining order, get one. There are things that you need to physically do. Magic is not going to cause things to just go away. So you need to make sure that you're following that chain of command first. Then you can move on to some of these ideas that can help. Okay, a protection jar is the first one we're going to talk about here. Now, they're very common. Basically, what a protection jar is, it's also called a witch's jar. Any type of container. It can be small, it can be large, and it's filled with items with a magical purpose. Usually, traditionally, items are placed into the jar that had a magical purpose at some point or time. So one thing that a lot of practitioners do is they will keep a jar nearby And anytime they do magical workings, any wax strippings, leftover uh, items like burnt incense and whatnot are all placed into this jar. Other things, if a person works and does a lot of kitchen witchery, things like leftover food and chicken bones, fish bones, beef bones, whatever, are placed in there. If you are a person who does a lot of magical craftings, things such as leftover ribbon or yarn or thread, needles, and whatnot are placed in there. Other things that can be used to fill a jar are things like salt, water, urine, broken glass, needles, rusty nails. It's focusing the energy that you want trapped into this jar. So it's usually a lot of things that are either left over, have a lot of magical pull, or are considered negative. Because as we understand magic and understand energy, energy attracts energy. So when somebody is sending you negative energy, if you have one of these magical jars, protection jars on your property, that energy, that negative energy is attracted to that jar first and gets trapped in there. So usually these are buried in the ground, the corner of your property. If you are not a homeowner and you don't have property to bury it in, these can be placed in the backs of cupboards. They can be placed in crawl spaces, in the attic, in storage space. They can be placed above the rafters in your home, or they could be placed if you open up an air vent and kind of pushed into the corner of an air vent. They can be placed there, and that negative energy will be attracted. Just make sure that wherever that is away from where you spend a lot of your time. You want that negative energy to be attracted away from you. These usually don't have to be changed up, but if they break, if you start feeling extra negative energy being sent to you, then you may need to have more than one. You may need to use extra protection jars. So that's always a possibility. A witch's ladder is another very common way to deflect negative energy. Usually it's used to keep out negative spirits. What they are a length of yarn with knots in them, and usually feathers and sometimes bone is placed in between the knots. Various colors of yarn and feathers are used depending on the purpose of the witch's ladder, what kind of energy you're trying to attract through the feathers, and what kind of energy you're trying to deflect through the yarn. So knowing your correspondences is very important. The purpose of a witch's ladder is, again, to attract negative energy and confuse that negative energy. Negative energy, the way that it's explained in the lore of the witch's ladder, negative spirits feel the need to untie all those knots. Usually there are 13 knots in a witch's ladder, and they have to take the time to untie all those knots, and by the time they've untied all the knots, they forget what the reason why they're there in the first place. So that's the whole purpose of a witch's ladder, and they're very good to help with deflecting that negative energy. Another neat thing you can do is use mirrors. Small mirrors can be found at your local dollar store. You can get like the small little compacts. Or you can even purchase mirrored tiles at crafting stores. You place those on your windowsills. You can even make pretty crafts for your window using these. If you don't just want the mirrors on the window, you can make a design and create something. You want the mirror's reflective side to be facing out of the window. So this literally reflects the energy and directs it back to the center. I've seen some really pretty ones that have been made with old compact discs. And speaking of using compact discs, I've seen some really neat creative ways of using old CDs and turning it into a wind chime simply by using bits of thread and old CDs. It's good to get the kind that are silver on both sides rather than one side silver and one side a label. But placing these at the corner of your house would reflect negative energy very nicely. And it's a fun and pretty craft to do too. So, you're not just putting mirrors up, you're having something that's also pleasant to look at and not so strange. Another alternative to the mirror in the window can also be using a crystal as a sun catcher. The crystal traps and changes that negative energy. Some people feel that crystal in the window will be able to transform the energy or return it. So you could actually look at this similar to the idea of the circle of protection, using it as a filter. As I discussed in the Creating Circles lecture, it will filter the negative energy out and only allow positive energy in. Now, the final one that I'm going to talk about here are freezing spells. Freezing spells can be very effective when needed. These should be a last resort. The purpose of a freezing spell will stop the person or situation that's causing you issues. It stops it in its tracks. It freezes it. It's pretty powerful type of spell. How it works is you write out the problem, you place it in the jar and freeze. Put water or other items in the jar and place that in the back of your freezer. This will last for about a month. Usually that's all it takes for a person who is bent on causing issues to decide to stop, or the spell can be continued the following month. Usually should start on the crying moon and will last till the next one. It does take a lot of energy to do, and like I said, it should be done as a last resort. So these were some very simple and basic protective magic solutions. Now, they aren't the only solutions out there. These are just some ideas of what can be done. Remember, however, that you should always follow the chain of command. You should always make sure you understand the situation and what's going on. Make sure you look at the solution and possibilities. There's usually a lot of times when you're in a situation, it's very common to only look in one direction. And sometimes it's hard to look at all sides. And it's best not to simply react, but to look at the issue at hand and choose the method that best suits the situation, rather than simply going the quick route and eliminate what we perceive as the problem. Things are usually not as cut and dry and as black and white as we would like. It would be wonderful to look at every situation and simply see good versus evil, but that's usually not the case. Even in the worst situations, we sometimes have to look from the person who's causing the problem's side to understand not only what they're thinking, but why they're thinking it, why they're feeling the way they are. And sometimes that helps us in understanding the proper method of which to deal with the situation. If we can look through from not only our eyes, but from who's causing the issue. And that's a big thing that we need to learn to do. It's very difficult and it can be very trying, especially when you're dealing with the situation at hand if it's a negative one. But in the long run, usually it's worth it because there's always more than one side to every story. Thank you for joining me for this lecture, and I hope that it's helped you in learning what protective magic is about and how to do preventative magic first before having to pull out the big guns. So thank you for joining me, Mary Park.